This is the College GameDay Podcast for Sunday, December 22nd. Harry Lyles Jr., Pete Thamel, and Heather Dinich with you here today. A quick reminder to please download the podcast wherever you prefer to get your podcasts, or better yet, subscribe so you never miss a single episode. Guys, we have gotten here. It is somehow late December. We have done the first round of the 12-team college football playoff. Pete Thamel has thawed out from being in the cold. Pete, how was that environment and atmosphere, and how are you feeling today?
I feel good today. I still have my beanie on just as like a remembrance of how cold the last 48 hours were. But in all seriousness, man, it was a blast. It was a career highlight. Like, this is my 21st year covering national college football, and there aren't many 48-hour stretches that were as memorable as, you know, we did a 4-hour show in South Bend. The atmosphere there was just electric. You could like feel the energy in your like lungs, in your soul. I was standing on the sideline talking to Alyssa Lang, who was doing the game for radio. It's like, oh, there's John Bon Jovi just hanging out on the sideline. No big deal. Like, it felt big. It felt important. It felt historic in South Bend. And then the cool part, I think, was that it felt totally different in Columbus. There was an edge there. There were 30,000-ish Tennessee fans there. It got spicy. We were walking over to the stadium. People were yelling at each other. People had been drinking all day. Like, it just had like a little bit of like a toxic brew. And look, that fan base at Ohio State was on edge. There's no other way to say it. There was is this whole operation on the brink vibe there. And by the end of it, it turned out it's not. And they summarily dispatched them, and then it kind of turned into a celebration of Ohio State. But it was just like such a cool juxtaposition, such a cool moment after. I mean, how many hours, Heather, have you spent talking about this?
Oh, so many. But, you know, you're right. And everything that you're saying was palpable through the TV screen, because I was watching it in the warm comfort of my living room, which I'm not going to complain about, but I did want to be there, particularly at Notre Dame. And there was just something in that aura that was palpable, even as a TV viewer at home. And it was so historic. I mean, the fact that Notre Dame didn't even play a Friday home game in Notre Dame Stadium really until 2 days ago or whatever that was, right? It was just history constantly repeating itself in a way. But I thought Marcus Freeman's comments that when you're at a place which such a storied program, it is hard to make history, right? And they did that as the first team to play in the 12-team college football playoff. So the whole thing was just cool. And I'm happy that you got to be there and experience it in person, and you're thawing.
And I think we can all agree, I will make this 3 for 3, that we all thought it was cool. One thing that obviously I don't think that we could skip over is the amount of overreaction, I would personally say, about these games and the scores of them not being competitive, all of these different kinds of things. I'm curious with you guys, and I guess, Pete, we could start with you. What is sort of your viewpoint on this? Because I know for me, I'm still looking for the league, whether it be professional or collegiate, where we're having all of these competitive games in every single round of every single tournament.
So it's like a pithy question with a very complicated answer, right? Like, It is generally unfair that the teams that lost the conference title games or did not reach the conference title games have easier paths than the ones who won the conference title games, right? Like, that's just like counterintuitive to how competitive sport works. So I think that will change. Whether it does or not, we'll keep Heather busy this offseason, but it will also be predicated on it's a 1-year change before the whole thing changes, presumably goes to 14, although not cemented. And remember, it would take a unanimous vote. And therein, like, why did this happen? Like, if you're a casual, like, you're an NFL fan who's just kind of like catching up, like, hey, what happened in the playoff? How did this happen? Well, they designed the system when there were 5 major leagues. One got gobbled up. Now there's 4 major leagues. So it actually, if you seed this thing out with Oregon as the Pac-12 champion, RIP, and Texas as the Big 12 champion, which, again, when things started to be talked about, the Big 12 was still that way. At a certain point, things changed, and then they went to the SEC. But like when the conversations were first happening for this, and it was being designed as that. So it would make a ton more sense under the old system. But the one thing about college sports, the only constant is change. Things have changed. People want an equal and fair system for a sport where everything's never going to be equal and fair, right? It's just not designed to be equal and fair. So then it just gets into complicated minutia of voting rights and everything. I think going forward after 2025, the SEC and Big Ten essentially take control of this thing, right? Now, whether that means automatic qualifiers, whether that means pure seeding, whether that means more NFL-ish stuff, which I think are all like pretty well on the table, we will go with this system where they want to go. And there will be a lot less of like the Pac-2 filibustering for money and getting in the way. Like there's just all this like non-linear, quintessentially college stuff that has happened. And I think we're going to see that one more time here as like in February, they really start to explore changes. But Heather knows way more about this than me, but I just think like it made sense at the time. So I have some empathy for like why it is that way. It just doesn't make sense as it is played out.
Well, when I watched it as a college football fan, I think it's fair to say that SMU and Indiana were completely overmatched. And I think that the inherent problem goes deeper than the playoff format, right? And we can argue all day, did the committee get it right? I mean, literally, there are two sides to every story, and this is a perfect example of that. To me, the larger issue is the fact that Indiana didn't play Oregon. They didn't play Penn State. SMU didn't play Miami. So before you can judge who the best teams in the country are, you need a better way to judge who the best teams in each conference are, in my opinion, you know? So is SMU the second best team in the ACC? Well, Miami might have something to say about that. So if you look at some of these other teams like Miami, like Ole Miss, who I think on the outside looking in probably have the biggest arguments, there's deeper questions in terms of, is this the best way to do this? And I don't really answer, and it's not my job to figure it out. It's up to the FBS commissioners and the presidents and chancellors. But a lot of this goes back to, do you want to continue to reward conference champions, right, with automatic guarantees and first round buys? Like, is Arizona State, as whatever they were ranked in the final committee's ranking, deserving of a first round bye? Well, you can answer that as
what's their best win?
Right. And okay, that's a great other point.
At Texas State, because Harry stole the show in the post-game interview with Kenny Dillingham, where he basically said, I'm just here so I don't get fined.
And the referees told us to respect the clock, which apparently Kenny Dillingham and I did not do, but that's neither here nor there.
There you go. But
look at you, Harry, disrespecting the clock all the time.
I know.
To the point of who is their best win, I can tell you this. The selection committee has a different measure for strength of schedule than ESPN's strength of schedule. So they're not like shockwaves different. They're comparable, right? But the point is, why doesn't the sport have one transparent measure for schedule strength so that everyone knows what they're talking about when they say, you know, Miami's strength of schedule isn't as good as whoever's, right? So if the conferences are going to be unequal within themselves, why isn't there a more transparent measure of schedule strength to help justify some of this?
And, you know, it's kind of funny. I was in Indiana visiting my aunt and uncle, and, you know, my aunt was asking me about all the conference realignment. You know, they're obviously in Big Ten country. And she could not. And it's interesting because sometimes when you have these conversations with people that don't follow this as closely, you kind of find answers to the things that are sort of things that we debate and our questions. But she could not wrap her head around this idea that all of the teams in the Big Ten don't play each other. And she asked, well, how do they know who's the best team in the Big Ten then? It's a great question. Had no answer for her. Still don't, clearly. I think, though, my biggest issue with the critiques of what we saw this weekend, like, we didn't get to the second quarter of the first game before people were saying Indiana didn't belong to be in there. let's run something back really quickly. Indiana's been playing football, I think, for 126 years. I might be wrong on that. Check me on that. 11 wins in one season, that is typically 3 to 4 years of work, right? They deserve to be there based on what they did during the season. It's cool that they were there. It's literally one of the types of teams that people have been clamoring for. Hey, they should have a shot at a title. And Heather, to your point, we saw that they were outmatched. All of those things can absolutely be true. I just feel like people should have embraced the fact that teams like Indiana and SMU were there and had this opportunity, because it's, from what I have at least thought coming up into this was sort of the point of having 12 teams. People wanted to give more teams an opportunity to make the playoff. Their resume was their resume, and the outcome was the outcome. So, Pete, even to your point earlier, I don't know what a perfect system looks like. But in terms of what people have been asking for, I personally think that the seeding thing probably made this a little bit more messy than it could have been this weekend. But again, for the folks that didn't seem to enjoy this weekend, I would love to know what it is that you want to see.
Well, I was going to say, people also need to realize that, first of all, 2 points. One, we have seen in a 14 playoff lopsided semifinals many times. Okay.
14 of 20.
Yeah.
I read it on Twitter, so it has to be true.
Yeah.
Of course. And they're blue blood programs, right? We're not talking about fringe mediocre programs. We're talking about Notre Dame and the likes in the semifinals. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you have a 12-team playoff and you're talking about the 12th seed, well, they should be losing by double digits if you just go by the logic of a seeding bracket, right? We see this in basketball all the time. The higher seed, in theory, is supposed to win, with maybe a Cinderella story here and there or an upset. And as you go deeper into the bracket, the games get better because the teams get better, survive and advance, right? So I just feel like naturally the first round is going to have some meh kind of games.
To me, obviously, there's the issue of fairness.
When you look at the seeding and the matchups. But to me, the single dumbest thing about this playoff as constructed is that there is not another set of home games. Now, I'm coming off like double long johns, like living on the side, like awesome experiences, like inhaling it, drinking it in. So can you imagine being Oregon? Like, you'd feel a lot better about the Buckeyes going to Autzen than you would about going playing in Pasadena. And it's great. I love the Bulls. I love tradition. Nobody watches more bad Bulls than me. I eat the Cure Bowl for breakfast. All right. Like, Bulls are awesome. But this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And you want to reward the teams. You want to keep the regular season vibrant. You still want to keep the conference championship games if you're these league commissioners, because those are just monster ratings and then monster moneymakers. So you don't want to give that up. Well, you still have to design a system that rewards the best teams. It rewards the teams that are earning these buys and doing this. So I just feel like if you don't want to reward the 5 and the 6 seed as much as they've been rewarded with their paths and with their home games, you need to give those teams that play the best football in the country and win their leagues and earn their conference championship, you need to reward them with a home game. That's a couple $1 million more in the bank, but it's also, having just lived through 2 of them, it is like an indelible memory. People, shooting their Christmas cards, like, in the parking lot outside, like the energy, the enthusiasm. We went on the air, I think 4.5 hours before kick at Notre Dame. I walked out. I mean, that place there was 5,000-6,000 people there. Notre Dame delayed their finals and left the dorms open to keep the students around. That's the kind of stuff they do at Alabama, not at Notre Dame.
Yep.
So I really think, again, I understand the complicated web that has allowed the Bulls to hang on as long as they have. And I think if you want to go semis, Bulls, final, and a neutral, great. But if you're going to have 4 weekends of this thing, you don't outsource your best product. And the product on the home field, the product on the campus. What Ryan McGee, our friend who's on our podcast often, says, there's Saturday football and there's Sunday football. Sunday football is in an antiseptic stadium. It's indoors. Saturday football is rowdy. It's raucous. There's traditions. There's fights. That you can't not have, there is going to be such a difference next weekend compared to this weekend because of that. And I do think it speaks, like, there's a couple things that speak to fundamental fairness in this. And the Bulls being involved so early in this, to me, just is unfair to the teams that have earned those top spots.
Well, and to that point, as somebody who has a family who, in theory, would love to go to the Fiesta Bowl with me because they're off school and off work, guess what? Those flights from Baltimore to Phoenix are about $700 a person right now. One way. So
One way?
One way, right?
Wow.
Yes,
on
exactly.
Southwest.
Bingo. So it's about $1,400 per person just to fly there. And to your point, I said to my husband, Penn State is not going to get that atmosphere in the Fiesta Bowl. And I'm wondering how many people are going to fly out there, because how many people flew or drove to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game? How many people flew or drove to State College? And then you're asking fans to fly? I mean, the prices are through the roof for these games, just for the flights. That's not hotel. That's not food. That's not tickets. I don't know who's shelling out for this, but it's not this family.
All right, so let's, as a next topic here, there's a couple of coaches in this playoff that are or have been under a lot of criticism. Let's Pete, I'm having you pick out of a hat here. Would you rather talk about James Franklin or Ryan Day first?
Well, let's talk about James Franklin first, because we'll go by order of that they played. I am really indebted to James Franklin because his absolute smashing of SMU allowed me to take a much needed nap on Saturday afternoon, because we had a late one in South Bend, had to haul down to Columbus, had an early show. I was pretty tired. And I can tell you what, I didn't watch a snap of the second half of that Penn State SMU game, and I'm confident I didn't miss anything. So thank you, James. I had all the faith in the world, and I was very grateful for that extra 90 minutes of sleep. So James, Ohio State and Penn State's fan bases have had first world problems, right? They have excellent coaches who have struggled in the elite type games, which inherently you're going to struggle in. Now, James Franklin is, boy, when he went forward on that 4th and 2 on his 4th and 1 on his own 20, I was just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
They got an interception. Everything worked after they didn't get it. But it was like, it was good to see that. And look, they're going to be, how much are they favored by against Boise?
Is it 11?
It's up there. Yeah.
Yeah. Double-digit favorite. So look, like, I'm a big believer, and this can go for James Franklin and Ryan Day, in the at-bat theory, right? Like, Kirby Smart was the coach who couldn't win the big one. I'm old enough to remember Bill Self was the guy who couldn't win the big one. Jim Boeheim couldn't win the big one. You get enough great teams and enough at-bats, you are going to win it. And I think Penn State's really well positioned to make a run in this thing from where they are, because they obviously have to be feeling good, have a momentum. What a showcase it was for their program in the first half on Saturday. And I really feel like, if that front seven, which is probably like the strength of the team, can bottle up Ashton Genty, now you're roaring into the Final Four, or whatever they're going to call it, but the semifinals, and you're going to be feeling really good right now, right? Like, they played well in the Big Ten title game. But I really feel like that's that opportunity beckons for James Franklin right now to try to reverse some of the narratives around his big game struggles. So,
Heather, do you feel like that almost puts more pressure on him? Because in a sense, like, now, you look at this Boise State game, Adrian's got it for us. They're a 10.5-point favorite. A lot of people are already saying it about this matchup. Hey, you've got a clear skill and talent advantage, right? Like, they took care of the game they should have taken care of. You've got this one. Let's say they end up playing Georgia or Notre Dame, right? Is the roadmap for them. Let's say they end up playing a Georgia team without their starting quarterback. Does this almost put more pressure on James Franklin to actually continue to get this done? Because it feels like people are still, and I mean, I agree with these things, but it seems like the path for him to have success is right there in front of him. It would just be his to mess it up.
Well, that's the narrative began the moment they got the seed and you saw the path, and it was Penn State has the easiest path through the playoff as their seed, right? So they are expected to win, but I would not count out Boise State in this game by any stretch of the imagination. And yes, Penn State's defense against Ashton Genty and Penn State's ability to get into the backfield, 20 quarterback pressures, I want to say, against SMU, 4 sacks on Jennings. They're outstanding. But I am still underwhelmed by the offense. The running backs have been fantastic, but Aller's ability to get some explosive plays out of that passing game, I don't know. I don't know if he can win a national title with his arm and that passing game if they have the receivers and the big play capability. When I look at the difference between Penn State and Ohio State, particularly with what we saw in their first games, stark differences in terms of the passing games. So to me, that's my biggest question, as if they can advance past Boise State, can they get more out of that?
It definitely feels like they leave more to be desired offensively. And one of the things that I was really hoping to see this weekend was, because, we talk about how much of a home field advantage it is, especially if you get off to a good start, these different kinds of things. I thought there were two, I guess in two of the different games. One of them was Clemson, Texas. One of them was in that SMU Penn State game where the Kevin Jennings doesn't go for the first down, tries to flip it into the end zone. I thought that was such a massive game changer. And then also when Clemson goes down, I think it was the longest first opening drive that Texas had given up. I might have that mixed up. But the fact that Texas then came back around and shut that down almost immediately and scored on their next 3 possessions, I thought it was going to be so interesting to see, okay, yes, the home field advantage is great for the team that is at home, and if you start well, then that's great. What happens when the air gets taken out of such a big venue like that? We didn't really get to see that. And I think that, it'll be interesting for Penn State now, again, on a neutral site against, a Boise State team that I think that Ashton Genty, when you give him the ball, whatever it is, 30 times a game like they do, he's going to break one probably. But it does leave, I think, an interesting path for them. And I kind of wish we would have been able to see that. Pete, did you ever get a sense of that? You really didn't in Columbus for sure, because they started hot and never cooled off. That could have been a thing at all.
Well, it was that way in
Columbus 3 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
I call it pucker power, man. When you're home and you're tight and there's high stakes and you're underperforming, you can get tight. Coaches can get tight. Play callers can get tight. And obviously players can feel that and get tight too. So there was a little tension at the end of the second quarter. Tennessee came back, cut it to 21-10, and then had the ball coming out to start the second half. And I really thought that Ohio State won the game by just barnstorming out 21-0. The face mask early really caught them, prevented them from going on a 3-and-out in the first drive, and they did an unbelievable job doing all the things they didn't do play calling wise against Michigan. They stretched the field. They really, really hunted Jeremiah Smith. And they also just used a ton of misdirection, and they used the edges really effectively. Tennessee was vulnerable at linebacker. They got the backs out of the backfield. They used the wheel route. I really thought they called the game to take control of the game, and which I thought was critically important, because you don't want that home crowd to tense up, and there really wasn't that. And then right out of the second half, it was boom, 3-and-out again for Tennessee. Ohio State came back, and it was time to go get warm for the Vol fans at that point, because there was a long drive and some expensive tickets to watch that annihilation.
Yeah, and to bring us back, Heather, what do you think that the way, not just Ohio State's win, but the way that they won, what do you think that did for Ryan Day? Because obviously, to bring us back here, he was another one of the coaches that, came into this with a lot of pressure from the outside on him. I'm just curious your thoughts on what he did for himself and his job security on Saturday.
Well, to me, and Pete might feel differently about this, but to me, I thought the questions about his job security he should have silenced the critics, because it's not just the fact that he won, it's the fact that he was able to get the team back together, a mature enough group to say, all right, what's not working here? What do we need to fix immediately? And let's go do it. And they had that head down, back to work mentality instead of sulking, and came out swinging. And they answered exactly what everyone was criticizing them for: getting the ball to Jeremiah Smith, running the ball, using the offensive line, which had been banged up in a huge storyline, moving the line of scrimmage. They did everything, and they did it well for 4 quarters. And so regardless of what happens against Oregon, I think as long as they play a close game and don't get embarrassed, and if they do what they did, this should stop. Quite frankly, it should stop, because he did a heck of a coaching job. I'm not excusing the loss to Michigan. It will still be the most baffling loss probably that I've seen, I don't know, maybe ever, in covering college football. They should not have lost that game. Notre Dame, NIU is right up there, but really, of all years. But I think that the redemption was there because of how they played. And if they play like that, there's no reason they can't win this whole thing.
I'd completely forgotten about that Northern Illinois loss because of just what we've seen out of Notre Dame the last 6 weeks. Holy cow. That is just, yes.
I want to know what Pete thinks about his job security after that.
So I think his job is
Very secure. And again, we could play the hypothetical game if they'd lost and all that stuff. But I mean, I talked to Ross Bjork, the athletic director, on the sideline, but before the game for a while on Saturday night. And one of the things, like, there's never been a moment where it seems like Ryan Day has lost the team. And think about this: like, you look at some of the powerhouse programs, they have had 0 off-field issues. Really during his entire tenure. I can't recall an arrest. I can't recall, like, you look at the rhythms of these things and how they go, and like, is the guy in charge have a good culture, running a great program, running a clean program? Like, the only missteps have been the 4 Michigan games, really, when it comes down to it. There have been some small things, and I think that Oregon loss will get remicroscoped this week, right? And it'll be interesting to see how Ohio State has evolved since that loss, because I really felt like, everyone focused on the end, obviously, with the Lanning sleight of hand with the penalty and to take the time off the clock. But I really felt like Oregon gashed Ohio State in that game. That's what one of my memories is, just they could not get a big stop. Jordan James, 5 yards a carry. Gabriel ran it for 8 yards a carry. Both of them had rushing touchdowns, and they went for 5 yards a carry as a team in that game. They absolutely torched Denzel Burke. It was probably the worst big game performance by a corner in college football this year. It was something like 8 catches for 179 yards. So I think a really key play in that game, going off memory, and I'll probably watch it again before we go out to Pasadena, was the onside kick line drive. Like, yes, that helped change the tenor a little bit. But to Ohio State's credit, they revamped their entire defense from that point. They started playing more different fronts. They started being more aggressive. They were very vanilla and flat. And some years at Ohio State, you can be a little vanilla because you have so much better players than everyone. And so I really felt like there was a call to arms there defensively. So I think we're going to see 2 programs that have evolved. Remember, Oregon didn't have Jordan Burch in that game. He's their best defensive player, one of the best defensive players in college football. So it'll be really interesting to see it coming forward. But I think for, the big picture, what Heather asked on Ryan Day, I feel like everyone's breathing a sigh of relief, right? After that, you could see the smile on Day's face. There was one shot that got replayed a lot in the second half of that game. There was like clear relief for him. I spent some time with him before he came on game day on Saturday morning, and we were chatting, and I think he is more comfortable in the role of underdog and hunter than he is guy at the top. Urban Meyer always used to say this, like, it's much easier to climb the mountain than it is to maintain on the top of the mountain. And right, there are only maybe 2 or 3 guys that I can come up with off the top of my head in the 20 years that I've done this who are elite at staying at the top of the mountain, right? That's why it's so hard. It's, Nick Saban writes books about fighting human nature. Like that's really That's a difficult thing to do. Day's background, small school quarterback, grinded his way up in coaching. Like he, it fed into how he's more comfortable leading a team. I think, hey, everyone's against us, and let's rally and go. And they clearly played with kind of that edge that came from their backs being against the wall.
Yeah, Pete, it feels like, because I was even looking with the history of Penn State football, the history of Ohio State football, and James Franklin is one of the best coaches that program's ever had. And, you talk about Ryan Day's missteps in some of the Michigan games. I really think the only misstep was this year. Like truly bad, like you stepped on your own foot and fell over was like this year. Because do we really think the loss last year was bad? Michigan went 15-0, right? And so I think coaches, especially now, right, that we have a playoff, and now the playoff is 12 teams, and everybody thinks that they should have a shot or will have a shot. These different things, that people are expecting a standard of winning that has been achieved by basically the guy that we see every Saturday, Nick Saban. Like, they kind of expect that from everybody, and that's just not going to happen. I'm sorry if you're a Penn State, if you're an Ohio State fan, or if you're a fan of another program that thinks that you should be contending for a national championship every 4 years. You're out of your mind. It's not going to happen like that. I'm sorry. That's what made
Especially
the bowl game
now.
so awesome. Especially now. And honestly, I think that's part of the danger in getting rid of a guy like that who has still won a ton of football games and played in a lot of high-level football games, and just assuming you're going to stay afloat with the way that the college football landscape is now, with the transfer portal and the way things could change, because your collective money is not going to be the same every year, all these different kinds of things. But that's probably another conversation for another podcast.
It also costs $38 million. If you're going to pay $38 million to a guy who runs a high-end program that's consistently in the top 5 because of one game, and you expect, like, the odds statistically of getting someone better, considering what you have right now, you're going to pay like more than $35 million to do that. That, like, when you start crunching the numbers and thinking about it logically, is like fairly preposterous.
It's hard to achieve. And speaking of dollars and cents, we hear so much about Ohio State's alleged $20 million roster, which brings us to the best in game, brought to you by Old Dominion Freight Line, helping the world keep promises. I'm going with Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. He had his best game of the year in the biggest game of the year up to this point, 2-touchdown performance. He got his 12th touchdown reception this season on his second one, and tied for the most in a season by a freshman in Big Ten history, joining Rondale Moore in 2018. I know we could have gone many other different ways with that, but I believe Heather mentioned that one of the objectives of this Ohio State team was getting Jeremiah Smith the football more. They did that, and so for that, he is the best in game.
Did you notice on the first one, like, he didn't see the ball until the very end?
Oh,
Did
yeah.
that come through on TV? Like,
Yeah.
because that was like happened to be like directly in front of me, and I was like, he has no idea it's coming. He has no idea it's coming. Oh, he realized it and adjusted in like a split second. It was just remarkable, like, feat of athleticism.
It's pretty impressive. A lot of people have compared him to Julio Jones, and obviously somebody that played with Julio was our teammate Harry Douglas, the other HD. Heather Dinich was first. And I was like, hey man, like, what do you think about that? Because Harry Douglas, man, like, he'll protect everything Atlanta and the Falcons. He said, hey, he's just like Julio. Like, so that's pretty high praise. High praise.
Julio's a Hall of Famer, right?
Yeah. Gotta be. Or, well, I think he's still not in the window yet, but he will be a Hall of Famer.
That's what I mean.
Best player
like,
in Falcons
he has
history.
had a
100%.
Hall of Fame career. Yeah.
Without a doubt. Guys, before we get out of here, which second round game or quarterfinal, I guess we're calling it, are we looking forward to the most, and why?
Well, okay, for me, it has to be Ohio State, Oregon, because it's essentially the national championship in the second round. Let's be real here. To me, the winner of that game, that's who I'm going with.
All right. Well, since you took the obvious answer, I'm not going to like double up on it. I'm going to say Notre Dame, Georgia. I think it's going to be a fascinating game. I really feel like we learned a lot about Notre Dame on Saturday, and just the quirk of their schedule after their loss, and then the games you didn't think would be good were their big games. The games you thought would be their big games didn't end up being big games because teams like Florida State just didn't show well. So I am anxious to see how they hold up against top class competition, which they just haven't played a top 5 type team yet this year. They obviously did go beat Texas A&M, who we've learned is like a top 20 team, right? So there's just a difference there. You've got the Gunnar Stockton factor. What's he going to do in his first career start? Oh, by the way, on this type of a stage, Georgia's O-line, it will be really interesting. I thought that was going to be like an outstanding unit going into the year, and I think they'll really be tested by Notre Dame's front. Will we have Riley Mills? That will be a question. Marcus Freeman hinted at some optimism there. We shall see how that ends up. But I think we have 2 marquee, fascinating games, and then 2 other games that could end up being good games. But those other ones are appointment viewing, locked in, every snap type, stop everything games, which is awesome.
I think Texas, Arizona State, off the top of my head, and mind you, the Peach Bowl, I'm from Atlanta, has been one of the football games that I am locked into every single year. This is the most, in terms of schools, I did not anticipate seeing with that Peach Bowl logo and everything that goes with it. Did not imagine Texas and Arizona State. But I think the game that I am looking forward to the most is that Penn State Boise State matchup. I want to see some Boise State Fiesta Bowl magic. I want to see the Ashton Jeanty that said I should have won the Heisman prove it. Let's see it, because I don't think that anybody except for Penn State fans would be disappointed to see Ashton Jeanty do that, because I think ultimately that's what people wanted to see this past weekend, was somebody surprise us. Boise State could surprise us next weekend. So
I think they're 4-0 in the Fiesta Bowl. 4-0.
They are 3-0, I think, and then I think Penn State is 7-0.
Okay.
So we're gonna see a first-time Fiesta Bowl loser this weekend.
I'm old enough to have been at
The Statue of Liberty game,
Nice.
where Ian Johnson, the star Boise tailback, proposed to his girlfriend after the game. Still the best game I've ever covered.
Amazing.
I've never been to a better college football game than that in my
awesome.
entire career. It was awesome, mind-bending. Adrian Peterson was Oklahoma's back. Like you look back at that game, and there was like 7 amazing things that like one of those individually would have made it like a top 10 game, and it was just this confluence of so much cool stuff.
Amazing. Pete was at that football game, and I was fresh at home off of final exams that I probably got B's and C's on. Thank you for listening to the College Game Day Podcast. Please download the podcast wherever you prefer to get your podcast, or better yet, subscribe so you never miss a single episode. Pete, Heather, thank you guys. Hopefully we get to do this again soon.